If you're a content creator, you may be considering a laptop with an OLED display. Well, this is Stephen from OWNorDisown, and I was lucky enough to have 3 days with the OLED Gigabyte Aero 15. So let's see if it should be on your shortlist. Gigabyte have launched a number of SKUs of their new Aero 15, some with an IGZO 240Hz panel for gamers and some with a Samsung OLED panel for those seeking better color reproduction. CPU options include the 6-core 9750H, which can be paired with a GTX 1660 Ti for $1,700 and that has 8GB of RAM, or for $1,900 you get 16GB. An RTX 2060 model for $2,200, or my model with an RTX 2070 for $2,500. They also offer an 8-core i9-9980HK models starting at $3,000 as well. Each 4K panel is framed by a remarkably thin bezel and is X-Rite Pantone calibrated. Now Gigabyte claims that this encompasses 100% of the DCI P3 color gamut, showing 25% more colors than sRGB. And indeed, using my Spider 5 Pro, I measured 100% sRGB, 96% of Adobe RGB and 91% of NTSC. It is also very bright. I actually had the Aero 15 sitting next to my Triton 500, both at full brightness showing a web page, and I had to double check to see if the Triton's IPS panel wasn't dimmed. The difference was quite astonishing. And indeed, at 100% brightness I measured 474 nits versus around about the 300 nit mark for most decent IPS panels. Since the pixels are shut off when black is displayed, the contrast is amazing. Now normally we are talking about 800 or 900 to 1, but this OLED panel recorded a 474,000 to 1. The only downside to the OLED panel is that it is very glossy and shows reflections, but it is more than visible outside. Many IPS panels look quite washed out, so I include footage of the Aero 15W as comparison. The VESA HDR 400 display definitely shows more details in shadow areas when you are watching TV shows. Here are some shots comparing it to my Triton 500. You can also see that those thin bezels also make the system seem much smaller as well. OLED panels also have very fast response times, less than 1 millisecond, so even though it's only a 60Hz panel, ghosting performance was definitely as good as any 144Hz panel out there. Now the only downside from a gaming perspective being that there will be some tearing unless you turn on VSync or hook up the Aero to a FreeSync or G-Sync monitor. I recorded this Overwatch gameplay and played it back on the OLED Aero and Triton 500. I think the main benefit being that you can see more details in shadow areas, which will help in those dark games like Metro Exodus. Gigabyte are focusing the OLED models on those that do content creation, whether it be via After Effects, Adobe Premiere or Adobe Photoshop. The 9750H handled it with ease, and of course you have CUDA hardware acceleration, which means that the NVIDIA graphics card will help speed up the process. To test how it copes with Photoshop, I ran the Puget Systems benchmark. It scored 654 points, which is 39% faster than the 4-core 9300H. And if you opt for the 8-core 9980HK model, you can expect an extra 25% boost. Gigabyte also stepped up the aesthetics and build quality. Now gone is the plastic cover that covered the hinge area, giving a much cleaner look, and the RGB keyboard is much brighter than the previous model. This can be configured in a wide variety of patterns via their control center software. Unfortunately, Gigabyte decided not to illuminate the secondary function key, so finding the question mark or colon keys in the dark will be much more challenging. This time around, we get a fingerprint reader embedded in the Windows Precision touchpad, and it worked very well. Now the 720p webcam is still located at the bottom, so it's not ideal, but if you do have privacy concerns, they have a sliding cover that shuts it off. And here's the webcam. You know what, I think it looks pretty sharp actually. It is, I do like it. And there it goes when you're typing. And of course you've got the cover, so let's activate the cover. And back again. There you go. But I am impressed with the quality of it. The Aero logo on the back of the aluminum lid is lit by the screen backlight and looks quite classy. I also like the design of the lid, it fits into many settings. And attention to detail is also shown at the back where they stamp the Aero between the rear heatsinks. And at only £4 14 ounces or £6 12 ounces with a 230 watt power brick, it is very portable and suits the professional on the go. And as someone who streams games and does video editing, I like to have a good port option, so On the left hand side we have an HDMI 2.0, a USB 3.1 with DisplayPort 1.4, a USB 3.1 Type A, audio jack and RJ45 port. And on the right we have two more USB 3.1 Type A ports, a 4-lane Thunderbolt 3 that supports external video output, a fast UHS 2 SD card reader with read and write speeds of about 220 megabytes per second, and a power connector. Now you will notice too that the cooling has also been ramped up. This time we have 4 heatsinks and 2 fans, each have 71 blades that move a lot of air. There are also air intakes above the keys. As you can see from this thermal image, cool air is brought in through the keyboard and the chassis doesn't get too hot, even underneath. You can activate the max fan by pressing the escape key, and I still think this is a bit of a poor location as it's right next to the sleep key. At idle the fans are quiet at 34 decibels and I could not hear any noise. Now under load with auto fan we are still pretty quiet at 42 decibels. Max those fans out though and you and those around you are definitely going to hear them. Fortunately you can customize the fans using their software. The speakers fired down at the front and sounded okay within the Hz sound software, but one of my viewers recommended using Boom 3D in the Windows Store. The back cover is also made of aluminium and requires removal of several torque screws to take it off. You will notice the large air intakes that help keep it cool. Kudos to Gigabyte for maintaining a large 94 Wh battery, which I found was good for 6 hours 20 minutes of streaming YouTube at 25% brightness. The speakers are here and you have 2 M.2 slots. One is populated by the fast Intel 760p NVMe drive. I like how they label whether the drive accepts SATA or NVMe. For Wi-Fi they have the killer 1650X Wi-Fi 6 card. Now I found this to be fast enough, but it did seem to lack a bit of range. The RAM is Samsung DDR4 2666 MHz, 16GB running dual channel, and it maxes out at 64 GB. To help with the cooling, they include 2 separate heat pipes and 2 side heat sinks, which they didn't have previously. In the dashboard of the control center, you can see all the pertinent information on the system. This includes the ability to alter the power to the CPU and the GPU. Now the CPU has 5 levels and the GPU has 2. Changing these settings definitely does impact performance, as you can see by an increase in the Firestrike graphics score of 7%. The difference in power pull from the wall under load is about 28 watts. Max out the CPU and max out the GPU power and you will be close to 200 watts. But as you can see, when I ran the AIDA64 CPU stress test with TimeSpy at the same time, using max fans, the CPU only clocks at 3200 MHz and max 86 degrees. You see this is continued in gaming like Battlefield 5 using DX11 Ultra settings running at 1080p. The CPU is pulling plenty of power at 62 watts, but the clock rate is kept lower than competing 9758 laptops, and as a result the temperatures are pretty good. Now I must point out that this is using their AI software that adjusts power and clock speed to where it matters. Unfortunately, since I only had the laptop for a few days, I didn't get a chance to undervote, but the feedback I've got is that this definitely increases the clock rate of the CPU quite substantially. And for those seeking the best performance, that is definitely the way to go. I saw higher CPU clock rates in Overwatch, here using epic settings and again at 1080p. I got a very good frame rates and temperatures, but lots of tearing as you can see when I pause the footage. Here is Far Cry 5 using ultra settings 1080p. This is with the GPU on the lower power setting. The CPU pulling about 62 watts and holding a fairly high clock rate with temperatures in the low to mid 80s. Now switching the GPU to max power, the GPU clock rate does increase and the power to the CPU goes down to 51 watts, as does its temperature. This demonstrates well what the AI software is doing. Increase power to the GPU and decrease it to the CPU. Frame rates do go up, so it's worthwhile keeping the AI on unless you are a power user. So at 1080p, comparing it to other systems with the same specs such as the Dell G7 with its 80 watt GPU and the Lenovo's Y740 and its 90 watt GPU, the Aero does trail them. It does need the max GPU setting to be competitive. So how does it cope at the native 4K resolution? Well, in Far Cry 5 you can expect around 35 FPS at ultra and 44 FPS at low. Playable, but not ideal if you're playing a competitive game like Battlefield 5. In the Cinebench R20 multi-core benchmark, the 9750H doesn't do very well at stock, getting beat by the Helios 300. it definitely needs undervolting to reduce the power throttle. Not that it's alone here, I do include a result from the new Omen 15 with the 8-core 9880H CPU, and without an undervolt that merely matches the i7. We see much of the same with a 30-minute handbrake video encode, so be prepared to undervolt the CPU if you want to see the best out of it. At stock, it trails the Y740 and the Dell G7, as you can see by the lower average CPU clock speed. So how would I sum up the new OLED Aero 15? Well, the panel is gorgeous. It makes regular IPS panels look like TN panels of yesteryear. If you are serious about having accurate color in your work, it is a no-brainer. Even if you watch lots of movies or play games that use lots of low light, you will notice details that you would otherwise miss. Now, for the competitive gamer, you should consider the 240 Hz panel for sure. Now, the AI does a reasonable job of controlling the power and clock speeds to keep gaming temperatures in check, but it does seem to be overly aggressive in CPU work. You lose a lot of performance without an undervolt. Design-wise, Gigabyte have stepped it up a notch, and it feels solid and it does look sharp. All they need to do now is have those secondary function keys lit up. Now, I'd like to thank you for watching. Remember, like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.